Hebrews 11:7. By faith Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith.
Love unsurpassing, endless love, guiding, shining down from above, fervently trust in all that's true. Love each other as Christ loveth you. Bound in sin, received his grace, trusting in a heavenly place. Good works filled in all you do. Love each other as Christ loveth you. Love, perfect love, will guide us home. By his side no longer to roam. If on our path we go astray, hold God's hand, there's no other way. Walking daily in his light, led by Christ, there is no night. Dwell beside him day by day, hold God's hand, there's no other way. Love so amazing sent his Son, conquered death, a victory is won. Constantly strive his will to do. Live for Christ as Christ lived for you. Richest blessings in God's plan. Gone the debt, now a free man. Dead to sin and raised anew. Live for Christ as Christ lived for you.
Whenever we talk about the word covenant, we oftentimes think about this new covenant, this new one that came to us through Jesus Christ. And we think about this largely because every single week we are reminded as we take of communion of this new covenant that has to do with this blood and what Jesus did for us. However, that is called the new covenant because there was an old one. In fact, there's several covenants that are mentioned in the Bible. And today I want us to take a look at my personal favorite story, one of the great characters of faith. His name is Noah. And all the way back in Genesis chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9, we actually find out about the first covenant. Now, I don't know about you, but the word covenant's not one that I necessarily use on an everyday basis. It's not really a word that I use all the time. But whenever we look at this covenant and other covenants as well, we can learn something about what it is. Because it's kind of like a contract, but not exactly the same thing. It's kind of like a promise, but still not exactly the same thing. It's a little different than a covenant. But when we think about a promise or think about a contract, we are kind of on a very similar pathway of what the term covenant has to do with. So let's take a look at Noah and find out about the very first covenant that was ever made. It's pretty fascinating if you ask me. So let's take a look at this story together. When we look at this story, I want us to see kind of at least the main story about Noah. And obviously we're not going to look at every single verse because I mean it's several chapters. There's a lot of detailed information. A lot of times it's the details and then the details are given again and again. And so it can get a little much whenever we're reading through it. But I want us to give us a bit of the summary of it. So when we look at Genesis 6 verses 5 through 8, we find out just how bad sin had gotten. Now, last week we looked at the very first time that sin had entered into humanity, and then we see that the next generation, they fail again and they give in to temptation, and they sin. The next generation sins, the next generation. We're several generations down now, and this is what's happened to the world. Genesis 6, 5 through 8. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. this is an amazing passage. Really, these few verses gives us pretty much what's going to happen throughout the rest of this story and why I like Noah so much. You know that sometimes people will come around, and a lot of times we think of this as a teenager type thing. You know, teenagers might say, well, you know, everybody else is doing it, you know, whatever it is, you know, whatever it is that they want to be doing, right? And we sometimes think that, you know, teenagers are going to use this with their parents, are going to say, well, you know, everybody else is doing it. Well, that usually is not really the case. That very rarely is ever the case, right? And one thing I will just kind of point out is it oftentimes isn't just teenagers who say that. You look at younger kids than teenagers, they kind of say that too. Maybe in different words, but they kind of say that too. You look at adults, they sometimes do the same thing. We like to think that whenever it's something we want to do, we like to think, well, you know, everybody else is doing it, so it's okay. No, that doesn't make it okay. In fact, when you look at the person of Noah, he is pretty much the only person who could say, well, everybody else was doing it. Now, of course, if you want to argue it, you could say that Adam could say the same thing, but with Adam, it didn't go so well. With Noah, it goes much better. So I like Noah better in this case because he is one who literally could say everybody else was doing it. The way the Bible says it in verse 5 is that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. That's bad. It's so bad that God felt sorry that he had made humans. That's why he's going to wipe them all from the face of the earth and kind of just reset things, if you will. But verse 8, we can be eternally grateful that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And through Noah, well, that's why we're still here today, because he listened to God. Let's see what God is going to say to him next. In Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 through 15, we read, So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. So if you keep reading, of course, you get more specifics on exactly how the ark is going to be built. I don't think that's as needed for us to know exactly how to build the ark, but it is fascinating whenever you find out about this ark. God says to make this ark. This ark is going to be the vessel for salvation. And whenever you read this description, you know, what's even a cubit and all? Well, I will tell you that a cubit is pretty much from your elbow to your fingertips. It's kind of like 18 to 21 inches, depending on what cubit you want to go with. So this is a really big boat. And I don't know about you, I still can't really visualize what we're talking about whenever we think about this. So that's why I want to share with you a few pictures that help me at least. Now, for those of you who have been coming here and have gotten this sheet of paper, it's the same thing that's on the screen, but this sheet of paper I find very useful, and it's available. I've put a link right here that you can find out this resource. It's free. You can download it onto your computer if you want to be able to see it in a better. Maybe you can be able to take a picture of this or look at it a little bit, but you can kind of see maybe what the ark could have been like. Now, for those of you who were able to go back in 2018, I believe, we had a vacation Bible school on Noah's Ark. And it was really cool because on the very last day, what we did is we took a field trip, if you will, to that Ark Encounter that's here in Kentucky. And that's also where I bought this thing. I love this. It's a model of the Ark, and it came from the Ark Encounter. Now, of course, you know, this stuff up here, it's things that they put on to kind of, you know, make it look a little bit more like a boat, because the description that we get in the Bible, it's just a big long thing. That's just it. It's a square box, well, a rectangle box is all that the dimensions that we get. Well, it would have been shaped a little bit more, you know, like a boat. So it's just kind of neat to think about what it would have looked like. But it is huge. You know, that's one thing that I was amazed at whenever I went there and I just saw how big it was. And going to the Ark Encounter, it was really neat because it's basically a museum that's set up. And the museum is the ark itself. And as you go through it, you walk and you really get a sense of just how big it is. It is huge. It was huge, and it's pretty fascinating. But this is something that Noah was told to build. He was told by God to build this. Now we don't know how much Noah had done with wood before. We don't know how much, if he'd ever built a boat or anything at all like that. But this is a huge task, regardless of how skilled Noah might or might not have been whenever it comes to building this ark. But yet, what we find out, if you keep reading, is that Noah obeyed. He did exactly what the Lord said, and that's why we are still here today. Isn't it great that Noah listened to the word of the Lord? But God is also going to say a few more things. Let's keep reading in this story. Genesis 6, verses 17 through 19. I am going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. So that's this task that Noah is given. This is what he's going to do. And here in the middle of it, in verse 18, something that we oftentimes kind of overlook, at least, I oftentimes do. In verse 18, God says that I will establish my covenant with you. Isn't that interesting? Now, he doesn't tell much about what this covenant's going to look like. He's just saying, get on the ark because there's a flood that's going to be coming. God is giving him the plans as to what's going to happen, and kind of, an idea about when it's going to happen. And thankfully, we read this at the end of chapter 6. We read in verse 22 that Noah did everything just as God commanded him. And just in case you weren't paying enough attention right there, a few verses later in Genesis 7, verse 5, we read, and Noah did all the Lord commanded him. He did it exactly as the Lord commanded him. That's also another lesson for us to learn from Noah, right? Whenever God commands us to do something, we need to do it. Do everything that he commands just as he commands it. Because God knows what's best for us. And here in this case, God knew what he was going to be doing. And that's why whenever we continue to read, this is what happens. Verses 17 through 21 of Genesis 7. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. In verse 21 we read, every living thing that moved on land perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. When you get to this part of the story, could you try to just imagine if you're reading the Bible for the first time and you get 7 chapters in, this is what you read? You might be thinking, okay, how are we still alive today, and what's the rest of this book about? Because it doesn't seem like it's going very well at all. It does seem negative. It does seem very sorrowful. At this point, a lot of death and a lot of misery has happened. But God is sorry for what had happened. He was saddened by everything that had happened. And he was going to cleanse the earth with this water. Every living thing perished. It is a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? And the story continues on. In Genesis 7:24, the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Many times we just focus on those 40 days and 40 nights that it, rained, but the waters kept flooding for a lot longer than just that. But thankfully, we get the center of the story, because up to this point, going all the way through chapter 7, we see that the waters keep rising. And then in chapter 8, verse 1, we read this. But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded. So this story that we have, it's an amazing story, because all the way up to the point of chapter 8, verse 1, we see that the waters are rising, but then after this, we see that they're coming down. So this is at the very middle of the story. We see that God remembered Noah and all the wild animals that were with him. That's going to come into importance in a little bit, because it's going to have to do with this covenant. God remembered Noah. God took care of Noah during this time, and he took care of everything that was aboard this ark. In Genesis 8:15 through 17, we read, Then God said to Noah, Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it. Basically, what we see that God is doing as he invites them to come out of the ark is He's inviting them to reset all of creation. The same idea about multiplying and being fruitful and increasing the number on the earth is the same type of language that was given to Adam and Eve, if you remember, because they are restarting humanity at this point. It doesn't seem like time has gone on too long, but I mean, it was a bit of time had already passed at this point. So much the wickedness was just spread all over the world. But God is allowing a restart here. And Noah and his family are going to be the ones through which everything is going to restart. And notice one of the first things that Noah did after getting off of the ark. Verses 20 and 21, we read that then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, and never again will I destroy all creatures as I have done. And now, at this point, we come back to this idea of covenant. Notice I haven't spoken too much about this covenant just yet, because God has only mentioned it. He didn't say too much about it, but now after this ark time that Noah and his family spent on the ark, they come out, they build an altar, they sacrifice to God, and now we see this covenant is once again mentioned. In Genesis chapter 9, verses 8 through 11, then God said to Noah and his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of the flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. We oftentimes call this a promise. And it is a promise that God gives us that he's never going to destroy the whole world again in a flood. But we see that this is the covenant. This is the covenant. And notice who it's established between. God is establishing his covenant with Noah, but also his descendants. And another thing that if you keep reading in verse 10, it says with every living creature. This covenant is with us as well. With this covenant, we do have the promise that God is never going to destroy the entire world again. Now, we've had a lot of floods and there's a lot of destruction, and they can kind of remind us of what this flood was. But God has already promised us he's never again going to flood the earth. And he's given us this covenant. He made a covenant with all of us. And he gave us a sign of that covenant. Verses 12 through 17, we read, And God said, This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Verse 16, Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth. This is an amazing part of the story, and that is this rainbow that we have. Whenever we see a rainbow, it gives us an opportunity to be reminded of this covenant. It is a sign of the covenant for all generations to come. I was talking with an individual who doesn't have a whole lot of Bible knowledge. I mean, they would freely tell you that themselves. They don't have a whole lot of Bible knowledge. They didn't necessarily grow up hearing all the stories, but they know some of them. And we were talking one day because it had just rained and there was a rainbow that was out. And he was kind of saddened by it a little bit because he was like, it's such a beautiful thing, but then sometimes people attach different meanings to it, and he wasn't too thrilled with that. But I told him, do you know what a rainbow, what it was originally assigned for? The original meaning behind it? He didn't know this story. So I told him, obviously, a bit of a summary of this story, but it's a sign of this covenant that God is never again going to destroy the entire world. When we see rainbows, we can be reminded of that covenant. We can be reminded of the promise that God has given for us for all generations to come. And I want to share with you one more reason as to why I like so much this story of cleansing. Yes, it's a story of judgment, but it's a story about the obedience that we are called to have. It's a story that God has given hope with us. That even though a lot of destruction, a lot of things around us can be going on, if we listen to God and if we do what he has commanded, then we can make it through these times. And we can see that beautiful sight of the rainbow that is a reminder of this covenant and this promise that God has given to us. But when we turn to the page of the New Testament, we get a whole nother reason why I like this story of Noah. And it comes to us from one of the letters from Peter. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 20 and 22, he said that God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it, only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through the water. And this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at God's right hand, with angels, authorities, and powers in submission to him. You see, one of the things that Peter was reminded of with this story is this water. It symbolizes the baptism that now we are called to go under. This baptism that we are called to go under, we are fully covered in the water. And whenever we come up, we are a new creature. We're part of this new creation. That's the way that God uses to talk about baptism. Just like after the waters of the flood, there was newness in everything around them. And then Peter points this, and he mentions it all comes back to this resurrection of Jesus Christ. So as we look to the story of Noah, let's see that it's looking forward to a time whenever Jesus is going to know all the wickedness in the world, but he is going to do something about it. Whenever Jesus came, what Jesus did is he didn't just destroy the earth. He had promised that he was never going to destroy the whole world with water, right? But what Jesus did is he made a way for us to be saved. Just like that water, it symbolizes baptism that now saves us through this resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jesus has given us a way. Jesus has been raised up and he is at the right hand of God. And he invites us to follow him. He invites us to be saved. He invites us into a covenant relationship with him. Not just the covenant with Noah and us that we have that too, but into this new covenant, this new relationship of following Jesus Christ and becoming more and more like him every day and doing the things that he would have us to do everything that he has commanded us. Let's be people of faith and have our faith firmly planted in Jesus Christ and what he has done to save us.
I love you, Lord, so I want to be baptized and wash my sins away. I love you, Lord, so I want to be baptized and then I can be saved. I love you, Lord, so I want to be baptized. With Jesus I'll be raised. I love you, Lord, so I want to be baptized. Giving God the praise, and I'll be born again. Born of the water and the Spirit, and I'll be born again. Washed in the blood of the Lamb, and I'll be born again. Walking in a life of forgiveness, and I'll be born again. Yes, born again, obeying Christ the Lamb. I love the Lord, so my friends, I've been baptized and washed my sins away. I love the Lord, so my friend, I've been baptized. I'm now among the saved. I love the Lord, so my friend, I've been baptized. With Jesus I've been raised. I love the Lord, so my friend, I've been baptized. Giving God the praise, and I've been born again. Born of the water and the Spirit, and I've been born again. Washed in the blood of the Lamb, and I've been born again. Walking in a life of forgiveness, and I've been born again. Yes, born again, a child of God I am. I love you, friends, won't you come and be baptized and and wash your sins away. I love you, friend, won't you come and be baptized? And then you can be saved. I love you, friend, won't you come and be baptized? With Jesus you'll be raised. I love you, friend, won't you come and be baptized? Giving God the praise, and you'll be born again. Born of the water and the Spirit, and you'll be born again. Washed in the blood of the Lamb, and you'll be born again. Walking in a life of forgiveness, and you'll be born again. Yes, born again, obeying Christ the Lamb.